car salesmen mind control their customers. They take their customers on a test drive, and at the right moment, they turn to the customer who's driving the car and say, "Is this the kind of car that you can see yourself driving?" And that causes the short circuit in the brain of the customer who's driving the car, because how can he see himself driving the car when he's really driving the car? So his eyes glaze over for just a brief moment, and this car salesman takes that moment to just take over his brain. And he says, "I'm glad you're going to purchase this car, sir. So let's go back to the dealership." Okay, and he just basically programs the zombie and turns the customer into a zombie who just obediently drives back to the dealership. And they sit down in the special room, and the salesman says, so how do you take your coffee? And he forces coffee on the person. Even if they're not a coffee drinker, they'll still drink it because they're basically under mind control. And they end up walking out buying a car that they had no idea that they were going to buy. So that's just one example. And they got that. They call it the Gruen transfer, when the person's eyes glaze over, in this case, because they're trying to imagine themselves driving the car that they are driving. But you can make somebody's eyes glaze over in all kinds of ways. And one of them is by traumatizing the person. And so there are like, dark shamans who mind control people in Central America through a combination of terror. And there's some drug they use that's become a date rape drug. And they get this Gruen transfer going, and then they take the person's mind over and control them. So the 9/11 was a case where people were traumatized by this huge event, the World Trade Center being blown to kingdom come on live television with these huge pyroclastic clouds chasing people through the streets of New York. It was like a disaster movie. And people, just like the guy driving the car who can't imagine himself driving the car that he's actually driving, people watching this on television couldn't figure out for quite a while whether this was real or whether it was a disaster movie. And that broke down their sense of reality. And the trauma then, when they did, were being told it was real, and there were 3,000 people dead, just wiped them out. And Martha Stout wrote a book called The Paranoia Switch, which she cites some very good research showing that about half of the American people suffered clinical PTSD based on the images that they'd seen on television on 9/11. So they were mind controlled. And this fear that was put deep in the unconscious of the American people then stopped them from thinking freely and independently and questioning the way that they used to. Essentially, the American people have been a flock of mind-controlled zombie sheeple since 9/11. And I think that's the reason why, even though my colleagues were quite open to the likelihood of 9/11 being a false flag operation, they had that paralyzing fear that prevented them from speaking out or doing anything about it. And of course, some of that fear is rational, because they knew, as they could see what was happening to me, with suddenly I'm dragged on Fox News, and I've got my 15 minutes of fame, and it's all, I'm being attacked left and right. They could see that might happen to them, and so they didn't want it to happen to them. So there's an element of rationality too. But in any case, people were terrorized. The real terrorists, of course, were the people who mounted 9/11 as a false flag operation to terrorize the American people into going along with a neoconservative dictatorship that dragged us into these wars that were designed to destroy 7 countries in 5 years on behalf of the extremist faction in Tel Aviv.